Let's make this cute Bulbasaur Pokémon cake with buttercream, and the only special tools you'll need are parchment or wax paper, and some straws. Of course, the first step is to bake your cakes. You'll need a 4-inch cake and 2 8-inch cakes. I baked both vanilla and chocolate cake layers to offer different flavours for the top and bottom half of the cake. If you're not going to serve the cake on the same day, I really recommend using simple syrup. This is half a cup of water and half a cup of white sugar simmered together until the sugar dissolves. And after it cools, I use a squeezy bottle to drizzle it, or you can use a pastry brush. Wrap the layers in cling film or saran wrap and put them in the fridge for an hour or the freezer for 30 minutes. For the filling and frosting, I'm using my 4-minute buttercream. The recipes for all of these are in the video description. Before assembling and carving the cake, you'll need a template. And I like to do this by setting up a fake cake, using the pans I baked my cake layers in. And I've used a bowl to prop up the top one so that the pans are the same height as the cake will be. This cake will be about 8 inches wide and 11 inches high, which is almost the same as a piece of printer paper, plus the green plant bulb on the back. Sketch your Bulbasaur. I'm using pictures from a Google search as references. The body should fit within the paper, but the green plant bulb at the back can stick out because that will be made from carvings and the little 4-inch cake. Draw the outline from 3 angles. The front, the side, and the top of the head is useful too. You can measure it by tracing the head on the sketches you drew of the front and the side view. These don't have to be super accurate, they're just a guideline to use when you're carving. Once you have your sketches, it's time to stack the cakes. To support the weight of Bulbasaur, you'll need a cake drum, which is a thick cake board, or if you don't have one, you can glue together 4 cardboard cake boards to make a thicker board. Take your cake layers out of the fridge or freezer and stack them. And it's hard to imagine these being a Pokémon character cake, but trust the process. Slide the 8-inch layers off-center to make space for the 4-inch cake behind them. It's quickest to stack the cake using buttercream in a piping bag, so spoon some in and then cover the rest of the buttercream with cling film or saran wrap so it doesn't dry out and crust. Pipe a blob of buttercream onto the cake board and press your first 8-inch cake layer down onto it. Then pipe buttercream to cover the first layer and repeat with the rest of the 8-inch vanilla cake layers to stack the bottom half of the cake, which will be the body. Instead of buttercream filling, you can use any other filling, but still pipe the outer ring of buttercream, which will act as a wall to hold in runny fillings like jam or caramel. Next, add the 4-inch layers, which are the beginning of the plant bulb on Bulbasaur's back. Attach the first layer with a dot of buttercream on the cake board and another dot against the 8-inch layer to stick the body and the bulb to each other. The rest of the bulb will be made with the cake carved off the body and head later. To carve the cake so far, hold up the sketch of the front view, after cutting along the outline to take off the rest of the paper, and cut around the shape. Cut diagonally down from the top to trim off 2 chunks of cake to create the approximate shape first, saving these cut-offs for later. Do the same for the side view. Then cut out smaller pieces to create the details, like the gaps between the outsides of the arms and in between the arms. When you've made the general shape of the body, trim around any angular parts to make them curved or rounded, and the body will start to come into being. For the legs, use the 2 chunks you cut off at the beginning and pipe a squiggle of buttercream where they're going to go and then press the chunks of cakes into that buttercream, which will act as glue to attach them. For the feet, pipe a bit more buttercream onto the front of each leg and then choose any large-ish triangular-shaped piece for each foot. Or you can attach 2 pieces stuck together with a bit more buttercream. When you cover the body with frosting, that will give it a more precise, accurate shape. It's really starting to look like a Bulbasaur sitting down, but before moving on to this onion shape at the back, I'm going to carve the head so that I can use the offcuts from that to build up the shape of the onion at the back. You'll need a small cake board and some boba straws for this next part. This is a 7-inch cardboard cake board, and I'm cutting it to be the size and shape of the top of the body. The head will sit on this board. To hold it up, use boba straws as supports. These are wider and stronger than regular straws. Push one into the cake about 1 inch from the edge, all the way down until you feel it hit the cake drum at the bottom, and then pinch it where it sticks out of the cake and pull it up, and cut it there, so it's exactly the same height as the cake. Hold it up against the other 3 straws and use it to measure and cut them so that they're all the same height. These straws will prop up the cake board you cut with the head on top, so that it doesn't sink down into the body and squash it. Push the first straw back into the cake where it was before, and then push the other 3 in. For each one, check it from different angles as you push it into the cake, to make sure it's going down straight and not at an angle, because a straight support is much stronger than a leaning one. Use the straws to make a square formation, with all of them about 1 inch from the edge of the cake. Optionally, cut a hole about 1/2 inch wide in the middle of the board by poking a scissor blade through it, if the cake is going to be driven anywhere, and I'll show you what to do with this hole later. And then press down the cake board that you cut. Then pick the cake up and put it into the fridge to chill before you add the head. When the cake is cold, it will be firmer and sturdier. For Bulbasaur's head, I'm making chocolate buttercream filling by adding melted chocolate to 2 cups of the buttercream and also cocoa powder mixed with just enough water to make a thin paste. This will make it super chocolatey. While the bottom half of the cake is still in the fridge, stack the chocolate layers, which will become the head. Alternate cake layers with the chocolate buttercream as filling, or use whatever other filling you like, and then use the sketch of the top view of Bulbasaur's head, pushing it to one side of the cake instead of placing it in the middle, and carve around it to give you the shape of the head at its widest part. You'll trim it to shape it later. Take Bulbasaur's body out of the fridge, and if you're going to transport the cake, push a wooden dowel through the hole you cut in the cake board. This will stop the top of the cake sliding around in the car. You can buy the dowels from cake decorating or craft stores. I bought this one from Michael's or Joann's. Measure the height of the cake and cut it just a tiny bit shorter. If the cake isn't going anywhere, skip the dowel. Spread some chocolate buttercream on top of the cake board and then pick up the chocolate cake and lower it down onto the dowel to center it on top of the board. Now it's time to carve the head, which is much simpler than the body. Cut a diagonal chunk off the top of each side, carving down and inwards, and then cut diagonally upwards. Then use little sawing motions to make the head curve around at the top and the bottom so it's not so angular. Next, you'll need the rest of the chocolate cake that you cut off when you trimmed around the sketch of the top of the head. Use 2 cuts to divide it into 3 pieces, like this, and you'll use these to make the bulb shape. Start with the 2 outer pieces, attaching those onto each side of the 4-inch cake using some buttercream as glue, and then cut the middle section of that chocolate cake in half, and attach each of those pieces, using buttercream, next to the body to fill out the bulb shape. For the tip of the bulb and the pointed ears, crumble up the rest of the cake carvings and mix them with just enough buttercream to hold the crumbs together. The mixture should feel like Play-Doh. Push them onto the top of the bulb to make it rounded, with its tip pointing up at the back. Then use little sawing motions to make the bulb curve around so it's not so angular. For the ears, pipe or spread a dot of buttercream where you want each one to go, and it's easiest to start with a ball of the cake and frosting mixture, a bit bigger than a golf ball, and press it into the head and mold it with your fingers. When the buttercream sets, it will hold the ears in place so that they're sturdy enough to frost. Put the cake back into the fridge for 30 minutes to an hour to set the buttercream so that the cake firms up, and the next step is to crumb coat it. You'll need about 5 cups of buttercream for this, or 1.2 kilograms, and doing the crumb coat is much easier with a thin consistency of buttercream, rather than when it's stiff, so add some milk until you can stir it easily and it looks smooth like this. Use a small offset spatula or palette knife to spread the buttercream all over the cake. You need to completely cover the cake so there's no naked cake exposed, because this layer of frosting is going to trap any crumbs that come off the cake. And after this layer sets, those crumbs won't be able to get into the next layer of frosting, so you won't be able to see them. This doesn't need to be perfectly smooth because it's going to be covered up soon, but you don't want any bumps or bulges of buttercream to stick out because those could poke through the final layer of frosting. So try to get the crumb coat fairly smooth. You can use a small offset spatula for this, or cut a small piece of acetate and use that to scrape the frosting smooth like this. Look how much smoother the frosting is now after using acetate to smooth it, compared to just using an offset spatula. Back into the fridge for 30 minutes to an hour to set the crumb coat, and meanwhile, set aside 1 cup of buttercream and tint the rest turquoise for the body. You'll use the leftovers to tint darker for the tail markings on the body and also for the green bulb. For turquoise, you can use turquoise gel or sky blue with a tiny bit of green, and I like to add a really small amount of avocado green or brown to make it less bright, a bit duller. With the cup of white buttercream you set aside, get 2 little bowls and put about 2 tablespoons into each. To one of the bowls, add a tiny drop of red to make pink for Bulbasaur's mouth. Add a few drops of red to the other bowl to make red for the eyes. Draw a triangle onto parchment or wax paper for Bulbasaur's eye. Cut out 2 of these and also the pink part of Bulbasaur's mouth. Then take your cake out of the fridge. Spread the pink frosting where you want the mouth to go and white frosting where you want the eyes to go. You might be able to see dark-coloured cake crumbs through the white frosting, and if you can, spread on another layer until it covers up the cake underneath. Then press the parchment eyes and mouth onto the patches of frosting. My 5-year-old made sure he told me that I made Bulbasaur's eyes too close together. Chill the cake for about 30 minutes to set this frosting, and then peel the parchment eyes off. Use another 2 pieces of parchment, cut in a curve shape, as stencils to cover up the parts of the eyes that you want to be white. The rest will be red, so also cut 2 little ellipses, or pointed ovals, to be the reflections within the red eyes. Now you can spread the red buttercream over the eyes, and when you eventually peel the parchment off, the buttercream underneath the paper will stay white. But for now, keep the entire eye covered with the parchment triangle you cut out earlier. Then scrape away any buttercream that's sticking out around the parchment, and then frost the whole cake with your turquoise buttercream. By now, the red buttercream will be cold and firm because it's sitting on top of cold buttercream and cake that's been in the fridge. The next part is definitely the most time-consuming stage, which is smoothing this turquoise buttercream. You can use your offset spatula for this, which will smooth the frosting that the blade scrapes over, but it will leave a trail of texture along both ends of the blade. Or you can use a piece of acetate, which works really well for sculpted or carved cakes because it curves around the cake, creating smooth, rounded shapes, and since it's so thin, it doesn't leave the trails of texture that an offset spatula does. It will pick up buttercream as you smooth, which you'll have to scrape off into your bowl of frosting and then wipe the acetate clean before using it again. And this process is slower with acetate than with an offset spatula, so I think the quickest smoothing technique, with the neatest results, is to use an offset spatula first to get the frosting as smooth as you can with that, and then use a piece of acetate to get the frosting even smoother. And since the frosting is already quite smooth, the acetate won't pull off as much buttercream, so you won't need to clean it as often, compared to skipping the offset spatula stage and going straight in with the acetate. And just to set your expectations, spreading and smoothing this turquoise buttercream took me 49 minutes, so make sure you give yourself enough time for this part. Chill again in the fridge for 15 to 30 minutes to set this turquoise frosting, and then to get the parchment off the eyes, use a toothpick to scrape gently from the middle of the eye outwards. And you'll feel the smooth, firm surface of the parchment underneath your toothpick, and when that surface changes, you've come to the edge of the parchment. Use your toothpick to pry up the edge of the parchment, and then pinch it and peel it away from the cake. Do the same for the mouth, and also for the white reflections within the eyes. Set aside about 1/4 cup of turquoise buttercream for the teal skin markings, and tint the rest to be a bright green. Before spreading this all over the plant bulb, use strips of parchment to cover up the turquoise body along the join of the body and the bulb. And this will keep the green frosting off the body so that it only covers the plant bulb. Smooth this. I'm using my offset spatula first to get it fairly smooth, and then finishing with a piece of acetate to make it even smoother. To create the curves of the bulb, I'm using an offset spatula dipped in warm water to mark out the different sections. But if you wanted to, you could spread the buttercream more thickly and then use your acetate to carve some of it out between each section to make the grooves deeper. Pinch the edge of the parchment and peel it away from the cake. To get the frosting even smoother, you can put the cake back into the fridge for 30 minutes to set the frosting, and then press a piece of parchment paper over any texture, and rub against it with your fingers to flatten the buttercream underneath. Now for the final details. Add more blue and green gel to the little bowl of turquoise frosting you set aside to make it a darker teal, and use a few small pieces of parchment paper to cut out the markings on Bulbasaur's face and body. Press them against the cake and spread the teal buttercream over them, scraping a few times to take off the excess frosting to leave a thin, smooth layer behind. For the line details on the face, tint about 2 tablespoons of the leftover green buttercream using black gel, and put it into a piping bag with a small round piping tip. This is a number 3. And pipe the eyebrows and the nostrils, and also outline the mouth to make a smile or whatever expression you want to give yours. Finally, use the leftover white buttercream, also in a piping bag, but with a medium round tip, like a number 8, to pipe the nails or claws on the feet and hands, and also the teeth. Oh my goodness, this Bulbasaur is so adorable. Now, storage and transportation and serving details. Keep the cake in the fridge to keep everything firm and stable. And take it out just before you transport it if you're taking it somewhere else to serve. For transportation, it's really important it's on a flat surface to keep everything in place, and that central dowel is going to prevent anything from sliding around. This is a cake safe, which comes with a central dowel, but I'm not using that because I already put one in. Place it somewhere flat in the car, like in the boot or trunk, or in the footwell in front of the passenger seat. If you're not taking the cake anywhere, take it out of the fridge about 2 hours before you serve it, so that the cake and frosting comes to room temperature, and that's when it will taste the best. Serving this cake is really straightforward. Start at the top, cutting down into the head, and you'll feel the knife hit the cake board under the head. Slide your cake slicer or server in there just above the cake board and serve the top half of the cake like this. When you've sliced all of that, lift up the cake board that was in the middle of the cake and serve the bottom half of the cake. You can serve about 60 people with this cake. We cut up the leftovers and kept them in a Tupperware in the fridge to enjoy for the next week, or you could freeze them for longer. So that's it, everything you need to know to make a buttercream Bulbasaur cake with no fondant. Ask me any questions in the comments or tell me which character you'd like to see next, and visit my cake school on BritishGirlBakes.com to learn hundreds more cake decorating techniques. Thanks for watching.